Hey guys, welcome back to the GM's table. Before we get started, I want to remind everybody to like, share, subscribe, do all that great YouTube stuff. Check out the Patreon below where you get access to early videos, PDFs, adventures, all that other great stuff. Alright, moving on. We are still in the Crime and Underworld month where we're covering savage settings that have to do with crime, criminals, and the underworld. And this week, we got Tropicana. If you're not familiar with it, Tropicana is kind of the South American adventure setting. It all takes place on a single island with a single kind of metropolis city. I don't even want to know if I want to call it as big of a metropolis, but it's very urban. I'll say itself, San Jose. With that, what do? Well, you can play as private investigators. You can do a full Miami Vice type game with this. You can play as mercenaries and guns for hire. You can play as spies. There's actually a lot of stuff in here to do a James Bond game that I really, really enjoy. Or, because it's in here, you can play as criminals hiding out or working within the organized crime within Tropicana. So, there's that. That's kind of your overview of it. Quick 2-second review. I like it. There's some problems, and they're mostly personal problems. Mainly, I'll say it's not perfect, but I really like it. I think it's the best way to say it. I want to get into the negative, because everything in here, and it's really only two things in here that I can even classify as negative. It's not even like, oh, I hate it. It's more like, it feels off, or it's not my perfect preference. The first is the very beginning portion has a lot of lore and fluff and history for the setting. It's all actually very, very good. It's just organized a little off. Things like they go, here's the criminal organizations, and each criminal organization, they're basically ordered in the chronological order of when they were founded. And this stuff goes back hundreds of years for some of them. Fine. And then within each one, they kind of keep their own thing. It doesn't tell you that this is going to be timelines or this is going to be the bulk of the history of the setting. It's just, oh, here's criminal organizations. But then right after that is, and now here's the founding of the island and the city. The thing is we just went all the way back hundreds of years, read a bunch of stuff in chronological order, then went back to the beginning. Oh, I just bumped my mic. If you opened with the founding of the island and then did that and kept those in that order, it would just kind of flow better. Again, that's like a very small nitpick. But that kind of stuff, it's littered with little things like that. Things that kind of go, oh, that ordering feels a little odd or a little off. And how their headers are, it doesn't really pop and differentiate sections as heavily as it feels. Everything kind of feels like a subsection of one big section that was never really titled. That's, again, a layout preference of mine. Like I said, this is the meh section, not even the I hate it section. The other thing you won't notice till you get to the very end of the book, but there are no savage tales, no adventures, obviously no plot point, but also no adventure generator. So there's no sample adventure or tools they give you to make your own adventures. This is, again, a preference of mine. Plenty of games don't have this, but for savage settings, it's one of those reasons I love savage settings. A good example is one of my top settings I love to use, but I never play the setting itself for the same reason, is API, Apocalypse Prevention Incorporated, because it's this very fleshed out, detailed world, and then they give you no adventures and no generators or tools to make adventures in the way that they're planning it. So you gotta do it from scratch. I believe Tropicana has a couple adventures on drive-thru RPG, but we're judging this one book. And from that, to me, that's kind of like it. If it's an A, it makes it an A minus. If it's a B, it makes it a B minus. Like, it's this little tick against you for my preferences. If that doesn't faze you, fine. But especially for the bigger and the more fleshed out and detail oriented you get into your setting, give me something to generate. Especially when we get into all the other tools this book has, it feels off that it doesn't have any kind of generator. All right, that's it. That's really the only negative. Like I said, my review of this is I actually really like it. It's just not perfect. And how often do you get something that's actually perfect? So going in, Character creation, you got a lot of your standard stuff. They do have some culture options instead of races, but really, again, unless you go really deep into the history of Tropicana and go deep into its specifics in its setting, like its organizations and its culture, its specific culture, rather than just using it as like a South American toy box for private investigations, mercs, blah blah blah. You don't really need it, and really, the whole game doesn't really need it. Humans work just fine. I bring that up because again, they want to give you a lot of this fluff, but it's organized a little wonky in a way that, at least for me, it kind of makes you want to glaze over it. And then they don't give you the tools to really help you get into the specifics of that world. So the the cultures really get looked over for me. But again, that's bringing in all my biases. However, the edges, there are some awesome edges here. There's fighting style edges, and funny enough, I'm going to compare it to API again, because API had fighting styles and they were just like, oh, it's fighting styles, and then you have to realize and read through it and kind of read their book, because they did a version of their own system where they point out you can only have one fighting style. The Savage book never said that, which then makes the edges make a lot more sense. Here, none of that. They're like, you take a fighting style, you can take more than one style, you gotta pick which one you're using basically on any given round, and you can pick it as a free action. But the fighting styles are very simple mechanics. They tend to give like a very limited bonus circumstantially. The thing I love is if you have more than one fighting style, as I said, you can switch them fine. But there's also a mixed martial arts edge that gives you a constant bonus on top of whatever your fighting style is that you can only take once you have multiple fighting styles. And all the fighting styles harken back to actual styles. However, there's also, I believe it's Kung Fu / Wushu fighting style, which is fun. It's not crazy over the top because this isn't a martial arts game. It's not the focus. But when you get into James Bond and stuff, very often you have those characters that are like, I know this fighting style. And it's there. And it's simple. I love that it's simple. I feel like that's kind of a big highlight in the edge section is these styles. I'm going to give you an idea of other ones. There's also an edge in here for having a super sexy mustache. I kid you not, and that's amazing. Alright, moving on from that, not really getting into the hindrances, all just kind of a little example. Again, I don't do flip-throughs, but they have a custom gear section in here, and I love this. Because when I was reading through, they're like, oh, you can do spies, and you can do James Bond. And according to Tropicana, none of the arcane backgrounds are allowed. I'm like, how do you do James Bond without weird science? Their custom gear. Because their custom gear section is everything you need to do James Bond gadgets without an arcane background. For things other than vehicles, there's only 2 things you can add, but you can add to any item. You can make the item smaller than it normally is, or you can make the item look like and function like another item. You want a laser that looks and still functions as a wristwatch? Well, you did laser and wristwatch. Boom. Like, that's how it is. Their example is actually a garrote. That's it. And that's all you need. And it's a very simple set of rules on how to implement them, both for costs and time and skill to do it. I love that. I'm probably going to transfer that to any time there's gadgets in a game. That's not it for the customers. There's also a whole list of things you can do to kit out vehicles. Because if we're talking spies and A-Team and Miami Vice, being able to trick out your vehicles is important. One of the things I love is, again, harking back to James Bond, is one of the custom things you can get is the license plate. That's literally multiple license plates that just rotates to a new plate when you need a different plate. Which is one of the older James Bond gadgets that was super practical. And I love that it's in this game. It's one of those little things that I'm personally nerding out over. I'm like, oh man, it's actually in a game. And I love it. But even then, without the vehicle stuff, 2 customization options. And you can do both. And they even point out sometimes the combining, you have to miniaturize the first thing so it would fit in the size restraints or constraints. But those 2 let you kind of just let your imagination run wild for James Bond gadgets. Alright, moving on from that. The whole game it's funny because they talk about it can be run as this or this or this or this. A lot of the game assumes you're kind of PIs or like an A team. You're an organization, and it's not this huge government funded organization like being a spy and stuff like that. However, again, they cover a lot that can do that. You're more this kind of, you're the guys who own a shop, like a shop front on the street, and people come in and you're problem solvers or you're private investigators. And because of that, they have a whole agency system. And I love this system because it has this like renown point system, which your renown points determine how many agency bennies you have. And I love the agency benny idea. It's a separate pot of bennies. You can't spend an agency benny unless first you are personally out of bennies. You cannot spend agency bennies until you're out of bennies. So you can't try and use them to keep your own bennies. Second, a player cannot spend an agency benny unless the majority of the agency is okay with it. That part is kind of feels obvious for a collection pool, but I also love that you have to be out of your own first. But on top of that, also determines how many people can work for your agency, not counting the players. You can get hirelings and people you hire to do different jobs, and there's a whole list of people, job descriptions like explosive experts, pickpockets, spy. I want to say spies, but more like people to go like tail people for you, stuff like that, down to, you know, just people who help out, a guy who can drive, stuff like that. Moving on from that, they then also have, and this is where it starts feeling weird that there's not at least adventure generators, because they have rules for competitions, which is kind of like a competitive dramatic task, and it almost breaks the game then into its own mini game of collecting cards to try and get the most cards. They have different rules for gambling, which is basically like a modified version of 21, so you can do gambling that feels more involved than just a single die roll. They have seduction rules, and this, they even point out, like, if you're looking to do it quick, like in this off thing, it doesn't really matter, you can just make this persuasion check, but if you want the seduction of someone to really matter, you can do it. And most importantly, it's how they get around the core rules of Savage Rules point out that, like, social checks and stuff don't sway players. The seduction minigame can sway players. And I think that's very important in this genre, because you need to have the femme fatale that can, though, go and turn a player against the party, or trick the player into doing things they wouldn't normally do. If you don't like that, again, with most things in Savage Worlds, and I point out, just don't use it. But I love that it's there. But it also is very involved. For it to succeed, you basically have to lose at this mini game. And it's a card-based kind of building up better tools mini game. So again, lots of very interesting mechanics, and each of them kind of go, all right, now we're shifting to almost this card game. And they're different. Each of those I listed are totally different mechanics and rules and stuff, which can also mean there's a lot to keep track of. So take the ones you like that fit. Now, they also have alcohol rules, and I actually really, really like their alcohol rules, because what it is it's a knockout poison. Alcohol just becomes a knockout poison. However, there's rules where the first drink you have, no effect, no check, no poison. After that, you have to make checks as if it were a knockout poison, which actually kind of means you're inevitably going to get knocked out after more than one drink, which fits within the theming of Tropicana. But then there's, rather than the stronger alcohols having a penalty, like deeper penalty, it starts where weaker ones have a really big bonus, down to strong alcohol, you just have a +1. So the odds of getting knocked out by your second drink are low. However, your second drink you have a check. Your third drink you have a check -1. Fourth is check -2. And so on and so forth. So drinking can really kick up. I already talked about the seduction rules. Oh yeah. Shadowing people. If I've done Deadlands New Orleans, that they have rules for it too. In this one, shadowing and trying to follow people is, again, kind of a mini game, and this one's very simple, but I really enjoy that. And they talk about how it can then immediately break into a chase, and how the flow of the game works. I think it was designed so it doesn't feel different shifting into a chase. And then finally, this is a rule if I run Tropicana, I'm not probably going to use just because I stream my games, But they have this really cool optional rule called the Tropicana Jukebox, where every player basically gets to pick 4 songs that help represent their character. And what you're supposed to do is from 4 songs per character, and the GM gets to pick at least 4 songs. I would probably do a little more just if it's a very small group, just so it's a long enough playlist. And then you take the playlist, you set it on shuffle, so you don't know whose song's going to come up at any given time. And if one of your songs is up, you get a Benny. But you can only use that Benny during your song. There's also a few other rules, and I believe an edge that can give bonuses for when your song's going on. Kind of like when the soundtrack to the movie you're in kicks over to your song, it's your time to shine. I like that in concept, but again, since I tend to stream my games, I don't think I'll use it because I don't want to deal with copyright stuff for it. But for an at-home game, it's a really cool idea. It's a really unique, interesting way to play with the meta mechanics. That's it, because I already talked about the no adventures. I had to have notes because, as you notice, there's a lot of different things. Personally, I don't know if I'd ever just run Tropicana, but if, like, I'm running my Wise Guys game and they go to Florida or they go to the Caymans, I'm busting out Tropicana. I definitely feel like, especially with the mixed theming, I feel like if I'm ever going to run Tropicana, I'm also going to pop out Wise Guys at the very least for the adventure generators. This thing is like heists, needing to get money out of people, needing to get around things, having to do sit-downs with big criminal bosses, stuff like that. That all fits Tropicana really well. I feel like Tropicana is about 99% done for my use of games. That 1% I can easily grab elsewhere, and I'll probably go to Wise Guys for it, not just because Wise Guys is the reason I'm doing this whole month, but just because the criminal underworld side of it works. You just strip all the Vegas stuff out of Wise Guys and put Tropicana in instead. So if any of that sounded good, if the lack of an adventure generator doesn't turn you off, I actually highly suggest Tropicana. And I will catch you guys next time. Bye. If you like that video, check out another video over here. Whatever it is, it's probably pretty good. Don't forget to like, share so other people can find the channel, and subscribe right up there. YouTube now won't let me put a link to the Patreon, but there is a link down in the description below. So if you want to help support the channel, check that out, and I will catch you guys next time.